Hi there, my name's Vince from mymatevince.com, and in this video today it's going to be slightly different than what I normally do, and I'm going to be testing out different ways of soldering. So now, if you're watching this to learn, you're probably not going to learn much, but what it might be interesting is for seeing how maybe somebody who's not a professional gets on when they try different ways to solder. So I've got a hot air station, and I have been using hot air for a while now to do various fixing videos, and I feel that I'm getting better with the hot air. But what I'm still not very good with is the soldering iron, and also what I've had literally no experience with is using solder paste. So what I've got here is one of these kits that you buy off eBay that come with a load of different chips and resistors and capacitors, and I'm going to try different ways of doing things to see what it feels like to, for example, use solder paste. Because when I do my fix-it videos, I always want to try and do the best I can do, so I don't risk using solder paste because it could go wrong. But who cares if I get this faulty here, because this is only a test board anyway. So that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to, for example, try different ways to attach a capacitor. I might put a little bit of solder on one of the pads, put the capacitor on, melt that bit of solder, and then it's going to line that nice and flat, and then put solder on the other one. On another one, I might try to tin the pads to begin with and then use hot air. On another one, I might put solder paste on both of them, so the capacitor is going to lie flat because the solder paste is just paste. Then I'm going to heat it all up. Trying different ways to do things to see how it feels. So I'm going to film it, and hopefully you might get a little bit of enjoyment from it. So let's zoom right the way in and let's get started. Just before we zoom right the way in, let me show you what I'm going to be using. So I've got some leaded solder. I've got some flux here. This is tacky flux. This is going to be my solder paste. Again, this is leaded. So this is the tip I'm going to be using on my soldering iron. You can see that it's got a little flat part on it. It's all quite bent up. My equipment is obviously not the best, and it's not professional grade. And I've got this set to 350 degrees C. If I do need to clean any of the pads, this is what I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using some solder wick. So obviously this is a brand new board here, but if you're doing repairs on stuff, remember you can clean off the old solder with some braid or solder wick, and then it will be the same as this. So now let's zoom right the way in. So let's start with the capacitors, and I'm just going to start by tinning just one side, popping a capacitor on, and then using the soldering iron. So this is what I would feel normally quite comfortable doing. So okay, so I've got a little bit of solder on there, and now I'm going to get my tweezers. I'm going to place that on here like so. Now I'm not using a microscope. Okay, I've melted on that side. Now I'm going to melt on this side. Put a bit more on that side. Okay, now that's not perfect because it's a little bit off to one side. Okay, but it's stuck in its place, and now that it's on, for me to kind of move that, I would have to use a bigger tip on my soldering iron to get it across. But that would make, and that should be okay. I can clean it all the ends. So now on this next one, what I'm going to use is I'm going to just put solder on both the pads, and let's use some hot air on this one, and then see if that's going to be easier or not. So with the hot air, I'm going to go to 350 degrees Celsius again, because this board's very thin, and I'm going to have my airflow set 4 out of a possible 8. So let's see now. So I'm just going to heat up this area here, and I'm going to get my capacitor ready. And now I'm going to drop it into place, and now you can see it's gone in. Yeah, and I can move it around. In fact, the surface tension, can you see there? Right, I've just bubbled the board up there. So let's lower down. Can you see there? Because the board's only thin, I've bubbled it up there. So let's lower down the airflow to around 2 out of 8. That should be fine. And I think I'm actually going to lower down the heat as well. Let's put it down to 300 degrees Celsius. But you could see there that the surface tension pulled it to the middle, so it's kind of makes it nice. Right, now I'm going to try to use a little bit of solder paste. Now annoyingly I haven't got a nozzle for this, so it's going to be hard for me to get the exact amount, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just place a bit on my mat and I'm going to just move it over as I need it. So I'm going to use some tweezers and I'm just going to place a bit on here. Right, now what I'm going to do is, that's a complete mess there as you can see, but let's heat it up, pop the capacitor on and let's see exactly how much of it kind of disappears. So let's get the hot air on it. There you go, look at that, lovely. It's gone into two little balls there, isn't it? There you go. Do you know what, that was nice, I want to do another one of them. So let's get another capacitor out. Get some more solder paste. So I haven't used solder paste before. But that was nice, I like the way that that beaded up there. Let's try that again. Okay, so that time now, can you see it's shorted right the way across? So that isn't as good that time. There you go, now it's gone into two separate balls. So I suppose you've got to be careful how much you use. Lovely. Right, so apart from the board bubbling up there, I think out of those, I suppose I felt more in control just soldering the pads and using the hot air, but I did like these two. I didn't like the way that that bridged, but you just got to get used to how much to put on it. So let's just get some IPA, that's isopropyl alcohol, and let's just clean these up and see what they look like. I'm pretty sure they would all test okay. So let's do a transistor now, so I'm going to be using, I want to try the solder paste again. I'm sure this would be a lot easier if you had a proper nozzle so you could get a nice amount on there. Right, this time what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to not heat it up. I'm going to put the transistor on there and let's see if it will all melt with the transistor in place. Right, I know that looks a complete mess, but let's see what happens. Look at that, lovely. So it is lacking solder on the bottom right, or really I suppose it's probably got too much solder on those ones there. I'm just going to give that one more go on the one underneath it. So I'm just going to spread it thinner this time. In fact, it's easier now because the board's warm. There you go, now you can see it's jumping back. Yeah, that's surface tension. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Just going to have a quick look underneath the eye loop. That one's come out really nice, so it looks like a thin a thin coating would be better. Just checking for shorts just between them, just to make sure it hasn't shorted underneath. Yeah, that's good. Right, okay, on this one I'm going to go back to the soldering iron. I'm just going to tin up one of the legs, and then we'll place the transistor on, and then we'll try to use a little bit of flux and solder. Let's see how that works. Okay, now for me that was very easy, that one, and it felt like you were in full control the whole time. I will clean at the very end again. That was nice. So now on this one I'm going to use hot air, and I'm going to put solder on all of the pads. So I've just put a little bit of flux on there. Right, so they've gone shiny, so I can drop that in place and move it until it gets in its home with surface tension. There you go. Lovely. Right, let's give them a clean up. For them, they all went on nice. I really like that solder paste on the second one, but saying that, the third and fourth one with the solder and also the solder on the hot air, I like doing all of them. It was only the first one I used a little bit too much paste, but if you look at them, they all look to be okay. So now let's make it a little bit more difficult. Look at these ones down the bottom here. Now, personally I haven't seen these before, but it says R, so I'm thinking they might be some sort of resistor. But they've got loads of legs on them. They're these ones here. So let's see how the three different techniques work on this one here. So I think personally that this one would be hard to do with solder, but let's give it a go. Put some flux on, and let's just try to tin up one of the pads. Okay, so that's the top one. Now remember, I'm not using a microscope. Right, so that's that one there. Let's try to solder up the others. Right, so I've caused a big bridge there, but let's just try to do the other side. I think that's okay. So let's try to get rid of this bridge. So I'm going to use a little bit of braid. Right, I'm going to have a little look at this. Okay, so it's absolutely awful. So what's happened is this side has taken, but this side is just up in the air. You can see there. So now that's going to be hard for me to remedy with the soldering iron, but I will try. So I suppose I have to heat up all this side now and try to push down. No, so I'm not going to be able to heat up both sides at the same time. So I will just try to add solder this side. No, so that's a fail there because it's completely bridged that side. So just add a bit more wick to it just to try to get a bit of the solder up, but I think I'm probably going to give up on this one. Right, I'm going to add a bit more flux and just put the iron across it one more time. See if that will make the solder stick to where it needs to go to. Okay, so one leg's short, and the problem is it's because it's kinked up here at an angle. Yeah, so that's no good. So with that now, that's a bit of a nightmare. I could just add some heat to it and it will flatten off nicely. But remember, that's the purpose of this video, just to try different ways to see how I get on. So now there's a tiny bit of solder just on this one. So let's do the hot air on this. So what I'm going to do is a little bit of flux, and I'm just going to add some solder to all the pads. There you go, so that's gone on nice. Not bothered about which way round this goes, so it doesn't matter if it's not the same as the other one. So let's add some hot air here. By me adding hot air, this one next to it might well flatten down. And now I'm going to place it down. There you go, and you can see there, surface tension again has taken over. So that's gone on pretty nice, but we'll check it out at the very end after I've cleaned it up. So now on this last one, let's get some paste. And let's just put it all over here like that. With this one, I'm going to heat it up and then drop it down onto it. Right, so it looks like I've got a bit of a bridge going on there. Right, surface tension is definitely taken over, but you can see that it's bridged massively on this side here. So let's use a soldering iron and see if we can rectify it with a bit of braid. There we go. Right, let's clean this up and see what it looks like. Me there, that's a clear winner. I think the hot air on this one just worked the best. So the solder paste did work well, but I just had to use the wick to get rid of it, and now really I probably need to add a little bit more solder to them two there using the iron. But for me, that middle one was nice and easy to do. Right, just to make sure it's not a fluke, I'm just going to do this one next to it just very quickly using the hot air and the solder. There we go. Okay, so yeah, with that one there, the hot air again applied it nice. Right, let's move on to, let's try to do this chip here, and let's try to do one side. What should I do here? Should I do one side with solder paste and one side with hot air, and then see what happens with them? So let's apply the solder paste to this side here. Let's apply the solder to this side. Now the dot of the chip, I didn't make a note of where the dot on here is. I mean, in this instance it doesn't matter because we're only experimenting anyway. Okay, let's put it up here because over this side the dot is this side, so let's pretend it's the same as that one there. So if you look closely on the actual chip, there is a dot. Now with this one I'm just going to try to get it into position first of all, and then we'll heat it up and we'll see what happens between the two sides. It is nice seeing the solder paste just kind of start to disappear and clump together. And also go nice, look at that, and go, oh, that is lovely, and go nice and shiny. Now, so you can see that surface tension's got that. I'm adding too much heat to this board, it's bubbling up. Because he's bubbling here as well. To be fair, looking at that, I think maybe the solder paste actually looks nicer on that one. So you can see there's no bridges and there's a nice amount on each of them. I mean, they're both fine, they would both be fine, but the solder paste did a very good job there. Right, so we have two chips now. Now we know that hot air and solder works. Why don't we try, should I try one chip completely with solder paste, and should I try the other chip completely by hand and then see what happens? So let's do the solder paste first. Now I think when you're doing solder paste normally you should have a stencil, so obviously this is a complete bodge way that I'm doing it. And just in case you've missed the beginning of the video, please don't have to comment that I'm bad at soldering. I am an amateur doing this. But if you know tips and stuff that I can improve, then add them down to the comments, because it won't just help me, it will help everybody else, because it's easy when you watch YouTube and you see professionals at work, because they've been doing it for years and they're very good at what they do. And then when you give something a go yourself, you might be disheartened because you realise how hard it is. But that's the whole point. When you keep doing something, you get better and better at it. Nobody's an expert when they start off, nobody. It's just that some people forget. what it was like when they weren't an expert. Right, okay, so what should we do here? Should we place the chip on and then just heat it up and see what happens? Yeah? So again, I didn't make a note of where the dot was, but on this one the dot's here. So I'm thinking the dot's going to be here, and that lines up with this one here. Right, because of the mess it's kind of hard to see exactly where to line it up, but I'm thinking it's going to be around there. So I'm going to lower down my temperature to 300 degrees Celsius because I'm burning this board because it's thin, and I've got my air now at just 1.5 out of 8. So now let's see what's going to happen here. Oh, look at that. I don't think I'd ever get bored of watching that. Okay, I've got some bridges there. And I think some bridges there. Okay, so it's definitely less is more. Yeah, but not too bad. Right. Yeah. So now let's just clean up a couple of those bridges. Let's see if I can get rid of them just with the soldering iron. No. Just going to see what that looks like. Remember, I didn't use any flux when I was using the soldering iron there. Okay, I don't think they're bridged anywhere. There's just a tiny little bit here that I just want to sort out. With a bit of practice, I think you could definitely get used to using the solder paste. Right, so there you go. Look, not too bad. Okay, yeah, I thought that one didn't take. So that one at the edge didn't take, but I think the rest did. So I suppose the hard thing with the paste is if you haven't got a stencil, then you don't really know. So some of them might be lacking the right amount of solder, and then others might have too much, which would cause a bridge. So these all appear to be okay, apart from this one at the edge. Oops. I'll scratch that up nicely. Right, let's just add a little bit of solder just to that edge one there, just to complete it. There we go. Right, okay, so yeah, solder paste. Remember, I am just putting it on with some tweezers, so I'm not kind of giving it a fair go. But then again, are you likely to have a stencil for absolutely everything you do? I think it's unlikely. But I suppose with experience, you would start to know how much solder to put on, especially if you had a very fine, you know, if you had like a a nozzle to put it through. I'm just kind of scooping it on, which is a real bad way of doing it. So now let's try to do this one purely by hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to solder each of the corners. So let's put some flux all the way around it, and we'll solder just one each side just to get the chip in place. Let's put one on here and one over here. And now let's get the chip. Get it into the right position, which looks to be around about there, I think. Let's just tap that one to get that one in its place. I've already bridged that. Okay, so I think that's in its place. So now I'm just going to go round and I'm going to tap each of the legs and let's see what it looks like. In fact, you know what? Let's just tap each of the legs on this side and let's try to drag it on one of the other sides. And so I think I've put a little bridge on one side, but don't worry, we can sort that out later. So now let's add a bit more flux and let's try to drag this side here, because I've got a solder bridge here already. Right, so I've got a nice amount of flux there now. No, I don't think I'm using the correct tip for drag soldering. Anyway, that went okay. I've got a bridge this side here, but that's gone okay. Now let's try doing this one by just tapping each leg. I think that went nice. And I'm going to try to drag this one again. Right, I'm going to have a close look now and try to get rid of those bridges on it. Again, I think that they probably would work okay. Remember, there's a lot of light reflecting off these at the moment, but there's no actual shorts between them. I think out of both of them, I don't know, maybe I felt slightly more in control with the soldering iron, but again, for me, if I was to use hot air, I think it would be a lot easier. So now on this last chip here, I am just going to solder up the pads and then just use hot air on it, and we'll see whether this goes on nice. Lining up the dot on the chip with the dot on the circuit board just there. Let's get the hot air. Wait till it goes shiny. Like now, and place that on. and then I'm just going to let surface tension drag it into the correct place. There we go. Apply a little bit of pressure and let go. Yeah, and you can see there that they've all joined on. So you can just give them a little hit with your tweezers and none of them are moving. So for me now, that one there was much easier than this one here. Obviously I can't compare it to these ones because these are a lot closer together, they're a lot smaller, so they're going to be harder. So yeah, that is it. Obviously in this kit you get loads of other things as well. There's some little diodes down here, or Zener diodes, and there's resistors and stuff for this side, but essentially they're going to be the same as what I did on the capacitors here. So now, what do I think? Oh sorry, and these kits you can get off eBay for I think around £5, so they're quite nice to practice on, and then it will save you having to damage the board that you actually want to repair. Now, what do I think of this sort of experiment today? I'm surprised at how nice the solder paste is. It looks so therapeutic, the way it just like comes together and goes shiny. It's kind of like a firework, it's lovely. And I think it would definitely have its uses. I think there would be instances where that would be good to use. Do you know what I would actually quickly like to do, just before I stop this video? I'm just going to pop on a little resistor. Well, actually, let me use one of the bigger resistors over this side. And I'm just going to use solder paste, but I'm actually going to use it with the soldering iron rather than hot air. So I just want to see what that's like, whether this, you know, how it works with the soldering iron. There we go. So you see I've got a nice bit there. So let's get one of the big resistors. Just place that roughly where it needs to go. There. And now let's zoom right in again. Okay, let's see what happens now with the soldering iron. Well, that's quite nice, isn't it? Let's do this side. Well, do you know where that might be handy? If, for example, because if I was to put solder on that first of all, then the capacitor or the resistor or whatever you're doing would be stuck up in the air. Well, when you do it this way, it does stay down on the board. Let's give that a little clean and see what it looks like. Well, okay, it doesn't look the nicest, if I'm honest with you. There's a massive blob over this side. It's not centralised properly. But I suppose it could get you out of a situation if there was plastic kind of connectors, ribbon cable connectors near this. Then you could use that. It might be easier than just using the soldering iron. You know, with solder by tinning the pads. Yeah, so maybe now in my fix-it videos I might try to introduce paste a bit more. That if I can get a bit more confident using it. Let me just try one of the transistors here. I'm going to give myself a bit of room and just do it here using the paste. So I've just put a blob just like that straight in the middle. Right, so I've got it roughly in place. Let's get the iron on it. So look, now it's going to lie nice and flat. Now let's clean the rest off. Okay, it's on. I'm just wondering whether underneath it would short at all. Okay, so they're definitely not shorting, so it hasn't shorted underneath itself. So again, although it doesn't look very neat, they've definitely made a nice connection on the pads there. So yeah, I know obviously if you've seen this you would sort of think it was a bit of a bad job, but maybe if there was a plastic connector nearby and you were worried about using hot air, or if it was somewhere where you might struggle to get the solder in for whatever reason and the soldering iron, well then by putting the paste on there and then just, you know, tapping it with a soldering iron, it might be easier than having a shaky hand and trying to get this in. I definitely think that the paste would have its uses, so I'm hopefully going to try to introduce this more into my fixes when I see fit. So for me, I've quite enjoyed this because I've experimented a little bit with solder paste, and remember this is my first time using it. I'm sure once you get used to it you know how much to put on, and maybe you don't need stencils for everything. Maybe you can just tell by eye, you know, a little ball here, a little ball here. You probably get used to it. It's kind of like first time you solder, you might use really thick solder to do something fine while you need fine solder. So maybe by me using this I'm kind of splodging it on and I'm putting way too much on and not enough on other pads. If you had a little nozzle on it here, then I suppose you could put the right amount on each little pad, and I think it would probably work quite well. So yeah, for me I think the evidence in the video shows that I'm still used to using the hot air and tinning up the pads first. That's what works best for me. But you can see that I damaged a board here and here because this is a very thin board. If this was a PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 4 or Xbox board, that would have never have happened with that sort of heat. So you have to adjust the heat and airflow for the thickness of the board. And I suppose that comes along with experience. So by using paste, you're probably unlikely for that to happen, maybe. Or especially if you're using it with a soldering iron. With a soldering iron, you're never going to burn the board like that where it bubbles up. So, well, I think it's highly unlikely. So, yeah, I think in this instance, overall, for me, the hot air and putting solder on the pads worked best. It worked best, I think, on the capacitor, on this funny resistor down here. On this chip it worked lovely, and also on the transistor. But that could be just because I'm more used to it. But yeah, I enjoyed messing around with the solder paste, and I'm definitely going to do more of that in the future. And I especially like the way it melts and all comes together. It just looks absolutely amazing. It's lovely to look at. So yeah, that is it for this video. If you want these kits, just check them out on eBay. You'll find them. Just do SMD Soldering Kit, or yeah, SMD Practice Kits, that sort of thing, and you will find it for around about, I think they're around about £5, which is pretty good value when you consider you get quite a few components and stuff like that. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe for more trying to fix and various different videos. Take care. Bye now.